What if Bananarama were Medway Garage punks? That's the question we'll be asking ourselves on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring this alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Cruel Summer by Bananarama. I tried to reimagine that as a Medway scene style garage punk track. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. Now, if you're a young person watching this channel, I know there aren't many of you, but my stats do tell me there are a few younger viewers who do occasionally tune into my stuff. You might not be familiar with Bananarama, and if you have heard any of their stuff, it's quite possible it sounds totally alien to you. I think in modern times, the idea of girl group pop has been so defined by a couple of big cultural things, like the rising influence of American R&B groups, particularly Destiny's Child, and at the same time the increasing influence of TV talent show singing contests, so the emphasis on this kind of virtuoso musical performance. And if you're used to hearing girl groups who've come after those couple of things, hearing Bananarama must be a really strange thing, because there's nothing to do with elaborate vocal harmonies, nothing to do with flashy shows of technique in there. There's no elaborate choreography. But yeah, there are definitely a bunch of great pop tunes in there. It's delivered in a style that harks back to a lot of great stuff from pop's past, but also taps into a bunch of stuff that was contemporary to them as well. They had their own unique formula, and it was wildly successful at the time, especially in the UK, but they had hits everywhere. Like, genuinely, legitimately record-breaking pop group. Formed in 1980 by Sarah Dahl and Karen Woodward, who were childhood friends who went to study at the London College of Fashion, where they met Siobhan Fahey, and the three of them bonded over their shared style, their shared music tastes, all very much interested in the punk and post-punk music scenes and the fashion that was connected to that. And I guess off the back of that came the idea to form their own group. And they started out doing impromptu bits of backing vocals for various groups. I think their first actual appearance on a record was doing backing vocals on a Department S song, possibly. But they made a demo, which eventually came to the attention of Demon Records, and that landed them a record deal. And probably the first time that the wider pop world became aware of them was when they collaborated with Funboy 3, the group that had been formed by the three vocalists from the Specials following that band's dissolution. And that, in a way, was kind of the perfect introduction to them, because they were occupying the same sort of space that Funboy 3 did in the pop world. It was very much pop music, but it clearly had roots in something a bit left field, a bit DIY, and a bit punky. And the sound was pretty great. It had obvious throwbacks to 60s girl group pop. You can hear like the melodrama of the Shangri-Las in there, hints of the Supremes, hints of the Ronettes, but then filtered through this early 80s lens with some relatively cutting edge for the time electropop accompaniments and hints of post-punk stuff. I think some of the vocal delivery as well. I mean, they could sing, but it was totally untrained and free of the usual kind of pop star pretension. There was no posturing, there were no dodgy fake American accents. The vocal approach was closer to something like Delta 5 or some kind of post-punk group like that. And it really caught on. They had an appeal that was quite broad, in the sense that pop kids would love it because it was bright and upbeat and lively and had simple dance moves that you could do, and it was relatable. But punks and indie kids could also still kind of get behind what they were doing too, because they obviously had some kinship there. And however much what they were doing might be aimed at the pop charts, there was some substance there too. Some of those songs are really good. Certainly in terms of singles, they were a pretty constant presence for a long time. I think as pop tastes changed towards the end of the decade, they did try and adapt to that somewhat. You see their styling getting a bit slicker, a bit less DIY and punky, and then eventually they hook up with the production team of Stock Aitken and Waterman. I think most of their earlier stuff was recorded with Jolly and Swain, who recorded a lot of early 80s British pop acts, Imagination and Spandau Ballet and the like. But by the latter half of the decade, Stock Aitken and Waterman were very much on the rise, and so Bananarama turned to them, and hits keep coming. For me, that's sort of the point where they become a bit less interesting, because although they were still writing, all the songs on those records are co-written with Stock Aitken and Waterman, apart from the covers, obviously. That Hit Factory production team do have a way of making everyone just sound like them, so they did lose a bit of their unique charm, I think, once they came under the Stock Aitken and Waterman banner. And a little bit after that, Siobhan Fay leaves the band. I think at the time she may have been getting a little bit tired of the mainstream pop thing. I think she was looking for a little more credibility. Went on to form Shakespeare's Sister with Marcy Detroit. Karen and Sarah carried on. They recruited Jackie O'Sullivan to be the new third member of the band, and the hits did carry on for a little while. And they only actually recorded one full album with Jackie as a member of the band, which sees them moving away from the Stock Aitken and Waterman collaboration. I think they were definitely looking for new sounds and ways to increase their longevity and branch out from that artistic cul-de-sac that Stock Aitken and Waterman production could represent. But yeah, I think the hits did start to become a little bit harder to come by, and Jackie left the band, and instead of replacing her again, Sarah and Karen just carried on as a duo, and they've kept going as that ever since, aside from a brief reunion tour with Siobhan at one point. But otherwise they've kept rattling on as a duo, and fair play to them. They can still pack out a house. I haven't gone out of my way to listen to a Bananarama record in a long time, but I kind of love that they're just still doing it, and they've still got a devoted fan base, and I think that's awesome. I feel like maybe because they were operating in this mainstream pop arena, making what's generally perceived as pretty lightweight music, they're maybe not afforded as much retrospective critical respect as they possibly deserve, because I mean, they were staggeringly successful. And for an all-female group at that time, the early 80s, some of the stuff they were achieving was pretty remarkable. They weren't manufactured, they were writing their own material, choosing their own image, and they were vastly successful doing that. So they really do deserve to be considered to be one of the era's great acts, I would say. And if you don't believe me, just go and put on Robert De Niro's Waiting and try and tell me that that's not a work of genius. Come on. But yeah, while Bananarama were beginning their quest for post-punk pop success at London College of Fashion, another post-punk movement was kicking off not far away over in North Kent, centred around the Medway College of Design, which I guess was a bit of a focal point for the early Medway garage punk scene. So although Bananarama and the Medway bands ended up making pretty different music, actually have a remarkably similar sort of origin point. If you don't know what the Medway scene is, you're definitely not alone. It's not something that's ever really particularly troubled the mainstream. I guess the closest it ever came would be during that spell in the earlier 2000s where a few garage rocky style bands started to just nudge their head into the mainstream, and you'd get things like Holly Golightly guesting on White Stripes records. And I think while the Hives were having hits, they toured the UK with Billy Childish's Buff Medways as support. But ultimately, that scene was never going to be the one that broke through. It's just always been a little bit too determinedly esoteric and insular, I think. But it's a cool little scene, so it's worth having a little look at. I guess you can trace the scene back to the original punk days with Billy Childish forming the Pop Rivets, who were pretty much just a straight-ahead punk band. When that band ground to a halt, his next act, the Milkshakes, was an interesting turn away from straight-up punk, because it's still got that punk spirit and energy and aggression, but sound-wise, it's looking back to earlier decades of rock music for inspiration, so a hefty dose of early rock and roll, there's a whole load of 60s beat beat pop and American garage band rock in there too. And that really becomes the template for the Medway scene. And pretty soon you've got a whole wave of bands springing up in those Medway towns, all just with their own slightly different takes on this kind of throwback sound, with some of them leaning more into mod stuff, some of them leaning a bit more into sort of psychedelic pop, some of them leaning more into gritty R&B, but all doing a different take on a garagey, lo-fi 60s sound with this contemporary punk energy and execution. So, as well as the Milkshakes, you get bands like the Prisoners, the Dentists, there's the Claim, and then following the breakup of the Milkshakes, Billy Childish forms the Mighty Caesars and then the Headcoates. My personal favourite of the Medway bands is the Headcoatees, which was the all-girl vocal group addition to Billy Childish's band of the era, the Headcoates. They'd sort of evolved from the Delmonas, which was an earlier girl group that Billy Childish had put together. So I guess the idea is that Billy has his main band where he's the singer and writes the songs, but then he has other songs which aren't suitable for him to sing, so he's the kind of Svengali of this girl group who come in and sing these other songs. Although I think they were initially just conceived as a bit of a sort of novelty add-on to the Headcoates. For me, those Headcoatees records are the best things that ever came out of that entire Medway scene. Just so much personality in them. 4 different singers, all with their own specialties and their different approaches. Holly Golightly being great at doing these more sultry bluesy numbers, and Kira doing these screaming rockers, and Ludella Black, who is particularly great at delivering the more melodramatic moments. Bungo Debbie, who always really brought the fun. And I think the first time I heard them, it immediately made me think a little bit of Bananarama, because there's just a similar utter lack of pretense to their approach. There's no posturing, there's no affectation. It just feels real and honest and raw, and I think that's why both groups have always really appealed to me. And I'm not going to go into the ups and downs and the dramas and the tragedies of Headcoatees and the Delmonas who preceded them. If you do want to know about all that stuff, I strongly recommend that you get the book Girlsville by Saskia Holling, which is a fantastic oral history of those groups and the whole Medway scene, really. But yeah, suffice to say anyway, all that Medway scene stuff is pretty exciting, but my recommendation, particularly pertaining to this video, will be the Headcoatees. It's just perfect music, really. It's poppy, it's bluesy, it's raw, it's extremely silly sometimes, and it's just guaranteed to bring a smile to your face. So yeah, it brings me to my alternative universe scenario for this week. Just pretty simple. In my alternative timeline, we're going back to 1980. The universe is pretty similar to our own, except that instead of going to the London School of Fashion, the members of Bananarama all actually end up going to the Medway College of Design instead. So instead of being immersed in that London post-punk scene, they're in the Medway towns. So they're on campus one day and someone hands them a flyer for a gig. They think, oh, well, I've never heard of these bands, but we'll go and check them out. And as it turns out, the band's playing the Prisoners and the Milkshakes, and they're really captivated by this sound because it's so raw. It's got the energy of the punk music that they love, but it's also a total throwback to this great earlier era as well. And they're already fans of classic 60s girl group pop, so they start to think, well, maybe we could get involved in this and do something that's raw and punky and hard-hitting, but brings in those elements of 60s pop as well. So they recruit a band and start playing and come up with this sound that's somewhere between the Shangri-Las and the Sonics or something. And they only have a short career, but they end up making a little string of 7-inch singles. None of them sell particularly well at the time, but they gradually get out and become more and more collectible. And by a couple of decades later, the likes of Jack White and Kathleen Hanna mentioned them in interviews as a major source of inspiration. So in attempting to turn Cruel Summer into a Medway Garage song, first step as ever was to just take the lead vocals, drop them into GarageBand and get them synced up to the grid. Once I'd done that, I wanted to just pop some drums down. For that garagey sound, I wanted it to be pretty raw and pretty loose, so most of it's just played in on the MIDI keyboard and not quantized at all. Obviously I programmed the fills separately because they're a bit fiddlier, but pretty loose, pretty swinging. I wanted the whole thing to have that kind of blown out, overloaded tape sound that you hear on those Billy Childish recordings, so everything is overdriven. and the drums particularly are kind of really pushed very hard, so they're almost completely breaking up. I popped some bass on next. Pretty simple. I didn't do anything too elaborate. It's just a nice woolly 60s-ish tone. Mainly just follows the guitar chords with a couple of little runs, nothing too showy. Guitar-wise, I'm normally really tempted to just throw loads of guitar tracks on anything I'm doing, but for this it didn't seem appropriate at all, so there's just two. The rhythm and guitar track, it's my homemade Telecaster again, going into a valve amp simulator, not really distorted, but just cranked to the point where it's just breaking up. Loads of reverb as well, so real kind of 60s garage band sound, and that's just hammering away quite aggressively on the chords. I came up with a very Kinks inspired riff to power the song along, so hopefully there's a little bit of a Dave Davies feel to the tone as well. And then the other guitar, I used my homemade SG for a bit more of a gnarly sound, and that's going through this really evil octave fuzz effect. So that's just snarling away there. It's just playing the root notes of the chords on the chorus, and then in the bits in between, it more or less plays the little synth hook from the original record, because I wanted to get that in there somewhere. And then over the outro, wild, chaotic, noisy leads. I was just kind of grabbing strings haphazardly. There's not much finesse in there, but there wasn't meant to be. And honestly, that's about it. There's not much else. I added a couple of little bits of percussion to just bolster the rhythm, but it needed to be simple, and it is. As I say, pushed everything into overdrive, so it's all just on the cusp of totally breaking up, and then mixed the entire thing in mono, so instead of having nice separation, it's just this big mush of noise right down the middle, which is exactly what I wanted. And then for the video, started out with a decent televised performance of Bananarama doing the song back in the 80s, capturing all their dance moves in their glory, sync that up to the track. Obviously, I'd sped everything up quite a lot from the original, so some of those moves look a little bit cartoonish, but I think that kind of adds to the fun. I figured they needed a backing band, so I've just used the Headcoatees as the backing group. So found a nice bit of performance footage of them and just edited that in at strategic points. And then, as ever, just the final touch, I've mocked up some gig posters of classic Medway scene bands with Bananarama inserted in there, just to sort of suggest that they were part of that gigging scene as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know how broad the appeal of this one's going to be. It's just something that I really wanted to do, so I got a kick out of it, even if no one else does. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you did enjoy this week's video, please like and subscribe. I always appreciate your support. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any songs you'd like me to take on, any genres you'd like me to try my hand at, or any artists you'd like me to take a look at, please do let me know. I always appreciate your suggestions. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will see you next time.